10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 227. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 227 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Hope everybody's doing well out there, staying healthy and getting through this tough time. And we hope that we can be some kind of relief to your everyday life right now to escape into practicing some jazz. So this week we are going to continue with our little series on blues phrases, and this time we're going to take a look at another often used cadence in the jazz language, the 3-6-2-5, and it's kind of a natural extension of the 2-5 that we went over last week. But as usual, a couple of housekeeping items. I've got some people to thank, some new patrons. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Patreon is the way that this podcast is supported and keeps coming at you each and every week in high quality. So I want to thank some new people that signed up. Thank you to Hans, Amanda, and Martin. And I also have a bunch of people to thank that edited their pledges up to $5 to join that new tier that we created. So thank you to Stephen, Mark, Joao, Ben, Simone. Thank you guys for signing up to increase your pledge to $5 a month. So we have two tiers over there. $3 a month gets you a PDF with every single episode. And $5 not only gets you the PDF, but also gets you the audio examples from every episode pulled out and made into separate files so that you don't have to jump around the podcast to find those. So you can sign up by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, getting yourself signed up, and you will get instant access to all of that. Another exciting development, I have started a daily jazz listening email newsletter. It's called the Daily Jazz Newsletter. We've got a couple hundred people already signed up. And if you would like to get on that mailing list where you get a track delivered to you every morning in your email, go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, and the top banner of the website will be a link to get signed up for that newsletter. I've been getting a lot of really positive feedback about that, people getting to listen to one, curated track every single morning. They said it's brought a lot of fun and happiness to their morning. So you can sign up to that by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com. All right, enough of the housekeeping. Let's jump into today's episode. So as I said, we're going to extend the 2-5-1 progression out to a 3-6-2-5-1 progression. We're going to look at it in two different ways, both I think very useful. So remember, 3-6-2-5 is a cadence that we see all the time in jazz. So if you're in the key of C, your 3-6-2-5 is going to look like E minor 7 to A7 to D minor 7 to G7, and then finally we resolve to C. So when we talk about the 3-6-2-5, it just adds a little bit more gravity to the pull of that cadence back to 1. And I think it's important to realize that we can still use these blues phrases over even a 3-6-2-5, but there's some considerations that we have to make and some things that we have to think about to make it sound as good as possible. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about the first two examples on the sheet. And in these examples, we're dealing with a short 3-6-2-5. So what that means is it's basically a 3-measure cadence, right? So you've got one measure. That first measure contains your 3 and your 6 chord. Your second measure contains your 2 and your 5 chord. And then finally in that third measure, we resolve to 1. Now we see this a lot in rhythm changes, bebop tunes, compositions that have fast moving chords, like, a chord every 2 beats instead of 1 chord per measure. You'll tend to see a lot of these short 3-6-2-5-1 progressions. So before we dive into example number 1, we have to think about a certain consideration that we're going to make. So let's imagine a 3-6-2-5 in the key of C, like we mentioned earlier. So you start with an E minor chord, right? Now, remember, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to use that C minor, major, pentatonic over that. So just to remind you what the notes are in a C pentatonic scale, this pentatonic that we're using for the blues, it's C, D, E flat, G, A, C. So that would be 1, 2, flat 3, 5, 6, and then you're back to 1. So we can get away with using some notes that don't technically fit the chord that we are dealing with. It's like what we talked about last week. But the one note that we want to really try to avoid when we're playing over that E minor 7 chord, the 3 chord, we want to try to avoid that E flat. It's just going to clash a little bit with the actual chord. And I know last week we talked about, being able to play that note over the 2 chord, but it's particularly egregious over the 3 chord. So we kind of want to avoid that. So if you notice in example number 1, if you were to look at the concert pitch, you're going to notice that I start on a G and go to an A. So that's 5, 6. And that really works over that E minor 7 chord. So for the first 2 examples on the sheet, what you're going to notice is I'm trying to stay on that 5, 6 area, the G and the A over an E minor chord, because I just know that those notes actually fit over that chord really nicely. And that's really the consideration that I want to make when I'm dealing with this short 3-6-2-5 and I want to use a blues phrase over the entire thing. But what you will notice is that over the entire phrase, I'm not using anything but that pentatonic scale that I mentioned. No notes outside of that. I'm staying 100% inside of that. And it still works. It still works really beautifully. Now, I'm also keeping a concept from last episode where I'm always going to resolve to the root when the 1 chord hits, because I want that line to have that gravity that lands on the root. Just works really nicely with these blues phrases when I do that. So let's check out example number 1. So you can hear, even though there's a lot more chord motion going on underneath it, I'm still getting that overarching feeling of just playing the blues. And that's really what we're after in this series of episodes. Now, hopefully you also hear that the first couple of notes over the 3 chord just fit really nicely. There was nothing ugly about those first couple of notes because I centered them around notes that I knew would actually work over that 3 chord. All right, let's check out example number 2, which has a lot of the same concepts as example number 1. You'll notice that this line is actually, it starts off very, very similarly to a line that we did in last week's episode. And I kind of did that on purpose just to show you that a lot of the same material will work, regardless of whether you're playing over a 2-5-1 or a 3-6-2-5-1, as long as you account for those couple of bad notes over the 3 chord. All right, let's check out example number 2. So very, very similar to line number 1. We are just kind of thinking about the blues over that entire progression the entire time. Very, very simple because all we have to deal with is that 1 5-note scale. All right, so now what do we do when the 3-6-2-5 gets extended? Meaning that there's 1 measure of the 3 chord, 1 measure of the 6 chord, 1 measure of the 2, 1 measure of the 5, and then finally it resolves to 1. This is a little bit different in my mind because the chord progression is so spread out and we so clearly hear the 3, 6, 2, and the 5. What I would want to do is think about this a little bit differently. So here's how we're going to set this up. Over the 3-6, we're actually going to go back to playing more bebop-oriented material. And what I think that this does is it contrasts really, really nicely with the blues material. So I'm playing, I'm sort of weaving my way in and out of the changes over the 3 chord and the 6 chord, playing our traditional bebop vocabulary. And then as soon as that 2 chord hits, I morph into playing the blues. And I think it's really, really effective. So if you look at line number 3, example number 3, you're going to notice that, the first 2 measures are very reminiscent of a lot of the concepts that we talk about on the show on a regular basis. You'll find a little bit of chromaticism. You'll find some flat 9s. You'll find a lot of the stuff that sort of typifies playing into bebop style. But then as soon as you get to measure 3, you're going to notice I morph into that pentatonic scale and finish it up that way. So let's check out example number 3. So hopefully you can hear that transition, from the bebop material into the blues material. It's pretty easy to hear, right? So I think you will naturally start to develop an ability to make that switch in the middle of the line. But use these lines to help you write out a couple of your own example lines, and I think you'll start to grasp the concept a little bit more. So I've done the exact same thing in line number 4. You're going to find a lot of chromatic passing tones, flat 9 over the 6th chord, all kinds of stuff, even a sharp 9 over the 6th chord. And then as soon as we hit that 2 chord, we morph back into the blues. So let's check out the 4th and final example this week. So there you have it. There's all 4 examples. Hopefully you can start to wrap your ears around that. Make sure you check out the PDF. And as always, my suggestion is to sort of use my lines as a way to start writing your own and exploring what you like to do best. If your ideas differ from mine a little bit, or if they, cause you to go on a completely different path, that's totally fine. This stuff is meant to just help you find your own voice. All right. Let me know if you have any questions. 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group is the place to get in touch with me. And if you want to get the PDFs to this episode, head over to 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and get signed up for one of those 2 tiers. Also, remember, if you want a brand new jazz track in your email inbox every single morning, go and sign up for our daily jazz newsletter. And again, that will be right across the top of the website on 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on that, brings you to our webpage, and then you can get yourself signed up. And it's pretty simple. It's a free service, and you get a brand new jazz composition every single day. People are loving that. All right. We'll talk to you guys soon. Have a great weekend. Stay safe and healthy out there, and we'll see you next week. Have a good one, everybody. Bye.